Shalom. Hope you're having a great day. Looking forward to making it a little better, hopefully. So, for those of you who were not here in the very beginning when we started this series, so back to basics, I talked about breaking up, sort of say, Jewish history into four different stages as far as understanding how it is that we came from where we came from and we became who we are as a Jewish people. So, the first step was about God creating the world. And we went into that over the course of the last few times. And now I want to get up to step two. Step two really is once the world was created, God created it in a way that it was still like the Wild West. There was still a lot of things flying around, a lot of things happening, a lot of people. There was no necessarily law of the land. And although there were people who were monotheists, going back to Adam and Eve, who believed in one God, but it took until Abraham was born, which was in the year 2448, until there was somebody who not only believed strongly in their heart and soul about this monotheism, but they were willing to really go out and fight for it and espouse it and sacrifice a life for it and really be a revolutionary when it comes down to it. And that was Abraham together with Sarah. They were willing to go out there and walk the walk as in addition to talking the talk. That was what God was sort of say, perhaps waiting for, looking for, and he found it in Abraham and Sarah, somebody who was willing to carry that load. And God made a covenant with them. And the covenant was very clear. The covenant, as with all covenants, it's not necessarily something we agree with totally, not something we necessarily understand totally, but it's an internalized deep bond that is created, like a marriage between God and Abraham and Sarah, to fulfill a purpose for not only their lives, not only the lives of their descendants, not only the lives of all of civilization, but really the purpose of creation of the world itself. That's a pretty heavy thing. So here we have these two people, Abraham and Sarah, sitting in this tent, making a covenant with God. And this covenant ended up being so revolutionary and so amazing because it changed the course of all of civilization. Two people in a tent in the middle of the desert, no fax machine, no Facebook, no cell phones, nothing. Just the power of their covenant and their relationship with God and their deep, deep belief in one God. This is what the driving force was for the creation of Judaism for all practical purposes. Although they were not known as Jews, and Judaism technically did not start until Mount Sinai, which is step 3, and we're going to get to next. But they had this special relationship. Now, a covenant, which we still are fulfilling this covenant, and as I mentioned earlier, Judaism is really not about being a religion. In fact, I think most Jews are pretty much, they don't really relate to being religious. I don't do this, me personally, Tuvia Teldon doesn't do this because I'm religious. I do this because I'm Jewish. Being Jewish means fulfilling the covenant. If the covenant means doing this and doing that, that's what it is, because that's what I do as a descendant of Abraham and Sarah. Now, in general, this covenant was about inheriting the land of Israel, very clearly from the Torah, that's part of the covenant. It's about spreading the belief in monotheism with a very active force. It's about keeping God's laws and values and mitzvot in order to be able to make sure that the world is conducted according to the way that God wants it conducted. So starting off with one couple in the middle of the desert is a slow start, but it's a start. And of course, we know the rest of history, how it's developed to be much more than just this one couple, because of God's faith in them as a couple to be able to fulfill his mandate. So with time, this covenant grew, and part of the covenant also, very interesting to note, I want to read you a sentence from the Torah that says, and God said to Abram, know with certainty that your offspring shall be aliens in the land not their own, and they will serve them, and they will oppress them for 400 years. But also the nation that they will serve, I shall judge, and afterwards they will leave with great wealth. So that's coming from the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, which is the third portion of the Torah. We see, in fact, this promise that God made to Abraham and Sarah as part of the covenant led to his grandchildren, really great-grandchild Yosef, being sold down into Egypt. There being a famine, everything changing over within the land of Canaan where they were living, where Jacob and his children were living, and them having to follow down to Egypt, and then getting the food that they needed from Joseph, which was at that time Jacob's son. And then, of course, all of the moving down into Egypt, and then the Jewish people congregating and living and growing and populating Egypt to the point that they became too difficult for the Egyptians to control, so they felt they had no other choice but to oppress them. And then, of course, the eventual liberation from Egypt, which came hundreds of years later. It's all coming from this covenant that God made with Abraham. All of those events that led up to the Yetzias Mitzrayim, to the exodus from Egypt, were God's way of fulfilling the promise that he made to Abraham. And why he did that, we'll explain next time. Why we had to go through that process is important to understand. But the fact is that this covenant was the drawing plan, so to say, for the rest of Jewish history and how we fit into a magnificent plan for fulfilling the purpose of the creation of the world. So Abraham and Sarah spread this word. They went through many tests, as we know, as the Torah describes. They didn't have an easy life. They went through a lot of difficulties, both of their own and with their children, and with fighting and wars and all types of stuff. But they came out victorious. And they came out with a family that was a strong believer in monotheism and the oneness of God. And of course, we know that their intense belief system, which led to the growth of a Jewish people, also led to a Christianity, which believes in the God of Abraham, and Islam, which believes in the God of Abraham, so much so that now 2/3 perhaps of the world population believes in, quote unquote, the God of Abraham. And that's amazing. So what makes our belief system different than their belief system? We all believe in monotheism, we all believe in God and Abraham. Well, there are many differences theologically, which we can go into another time. But one point I do want to make, being the B'nai Bris, being the children of the covenant ourselves, the uniqueness of the Jewish people is that we are actually family with Abraham and Sarah. We are their descendants. We're not just looking at this as a theology, a religious belief system, a biblical source. This is the Torah, as I mentioned in the beginning of our series, is our family album. And the blood, the DNA of Abraham and Sarah is flowing through our veins. So we carry with us a certain special connection to them, to Abraham and Sarah, which makes us a chosen people, which makes us special in many ways, and makes us really realize how in carrying that covenant, that responsibility, that privilege, how we do have a little bit of an extra higher bar that we need to keep in terms of realizing our important role in the world, in our community, in our surroundings, in our workplace, and in anything we do in our life as Jews. So with that in mind, we're going to go on, hopefully tomorrow, God willing, to talk about the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai, which took place really 500 years after the birth of Abraham. We'll talk about why did it take 500 years for this to happen. Take care, have a great day, and I hope you have an inspiring day, a day where you really walk around with a lot of Jewish pride, knowing where you come from and what you're here for. Have a great day.